Now we're on to filters, a 3-band equalizer. It allows you to change noises from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. You know, bass or low pitch noise, or what it calls low. Most noises, including voices and most instruments, they're considered mids. Highs, you know, sharper high pitched noises. And it allows you to change those pretty much however you want, but it's a little limited. I'm not sure why you'd use it other than to maybe make your voice louder, more of the focus. Okay, a compressor is pretty hard to explain, but it makes loud parts closer to flat shaped. You can see the graph there as an example as to what, you know, the ratio does. That's the main part of the compressor. You know, lower is more close to the real sound, higher is making the audio more flat. This is just my settings. The default settings are on the guide itself. You should really test how a lot of this stuff works. Anyways, I told you what ratio does. Threshold, it determines at what volume the compression actually begins. Attack determines how long it takes for compression to begin. Release determines how long it stays around before it stops. Output gain changes how much louder it gets. For something like a compressor, it is very useful because all that compressed audio is going to be quieter. So if it's more flat, but now, you know, more of a reasonable audio level, then that's pretty good. Sidechain / docking source will make it so when a certain source is active, this will get quieter. Most of the time you're not going to use this, but I guess something like music, it would make sense on. So there's that. Expander is the complete opposite of a compressor. So just kind of reference that to see if an expander is what you need. Gain literally just adds volume, which you can do in advanced audio properties, which I didn't tell you earlier, I think. Invert polarity flips the waveform in case for some reason the waveform of your mic needs to be inverted for it to sound right. And yeah, you'd use that. But why is your mic doing that? Odd. Very odd. Limiter. Just straight up walls off audio at a certain point. If audio is louder than that, it's still gonna try its best to limit it, but also it might just end up making it sound distorted once it hits that ceiling a little too hard. So make sure you're not using it on something that's pretty much always going over that wall the limiter makes. Noise gate. Depending on if an audio source is reaching the open, you know, it'll allow audio in, and when it reaches the close, it's going to stop letting audio in, so you're not just getting like random noise like, let's say, fans from a computer. Attack time is how long it takes for it to open. Hold is how long it'll stay at the full volume. Release is how long it takes to actually close. It's honestly a lot better in some ways than noise suppression, just because it doesn't completely destroy your audio. It just hides those imperfections at the very low levels or whatever you have your close at. Okay? And noise suppression. If for some reason a noise gain ain't working, this'll do it. Now, for some people, yes, this is just the better option because, like, let's say there's a constant fan noise, and you know, without the fan noise, you'd be just baking alive and risking your life. And yeah, you know, noise suppression. Okay, but just don't expect it to catch everything you're saying, because it'll sometimes see your voice as noise it should remove. And I hate to say this, but I've noticed, especially with women voices, it destroys quite a bit of their voice. I don't know, it's just the way they're made, I guess. But noise suppression, especially if you're a woman, may not be the way. Noise gate's where it's at. An upward compressor is kind of like the opposite of a normal compressor, right? So instead of making louder parts quieter, it makes quiet parts louder by kind of tilting the volume of that the same way it tilts the volume of a normal compressor beyond the threshold. You kind of get what I mean? Instead of going from up to down, it goes from down to up. So using both compressors can be pretty good, honestly. I use both. This is what I use, but it may not work for you that great. And generally on the compressors, you have a release time pretty high, considering what my noise gate's at, just because you don't want it to stop doing the compression, like in the middle of a few words. It just wouldn't make sense for it to stop compressing while you're saying something, because then, you know, random parts of that are just gonna be reduced back to normal. But you don't want the release to be too long, because then, you know, noises will, you know, still be upward compressed. They are generally at the lower end, so you don't want it infinite, but you don't want it to just easily go away on the fly. Attack though, it could like start the compression pretty much instantly. 1 millisecond is safe. I feel like I remember something wrong with 0. I think that just makes it always active, I think. A little weird. VST2.x plugin. It's for plugins that are not in OBS. I don't know what to do for those, honestly. You should if you're using them though. Now on to video filters. Apply LUT is applying a lookup table for SDR content. If you don't know what that is, then you probably don't need to use it. Most outputs just show all the colors anyways, so there's not much of a reason to apply a LUT, unless you're trying to use one of the basic ones like inverting the colors or doing grayscale. Chroma key lets you make a color transparent, assuming something's behind it. It's most commonly used for a green screen. I understand not all VTuber applications support just transparency, so you usually have to green screen or magenta screen or blue screen it. So if you can't have that transparency, then yeah, chroma key is probably your best bet. Color correction gives you a bunch of different color settings, like gamma, contrast, brightness, saturation, hue shift, opacity, color multiply, and color add. Gamma changes the brightness of the colors in the source. Contrast changes, well, how contrasting the colors are. Brightness determines how bright or dark the colors are. Saturation changes how intense the colors are. Hue shift, just think of a color wheel, and it basically just rotates all that color wheel, and all the colors change based on that. I'm not sure why you'd use it. Maybe like a slowly changing one or something. I don't know. Opacity will change the transparency of the entire source. Color multiply will intensify certain colors of the source based on what you choose. Color add adds the color you choose over the scene, and these will be in other things too. Color key works almost exactly like chroma key, so just look at that for the settings. Crop/pad is just a different way to crop. If for some reason you don't use the alt and drag thing, then yeah, that's a different way to do it with crop/pad. HDR tone mapping, alright. We'll do as it says, changing it to HDR instead of just SDR. Most people aren't making HDR content. Honestly, it makes a lot of content look worse on things. Even phones, which usually have OLED screens, which like that should handle HDR just fine. But no, it actually generally makes it look bad. So if you think, oh, I could give people HDR content, it's usually not worth it unless you're doing cinematography. So yeah, image mask/blend does as it says, and that means it puts an image over the scene. Type changes how the image will blend with the scene. Alpha doesn't keep color, blend does. Path changes which image you'll use. Color changes how visible all the colors are in the source. Opacity changes the transparency again. Stretch image will make it stretch to fit the canvas. Luma key works pretty similarly to chroma key again, but it uses how bright colors are, instead of what color they are. You can look at chroma key for some of those settings. Luma Max and Luma Min are the different ends of how bright colors are. So like if you want the minimum, like a pure black color, if you want that gone, then you can turn up the Luma Min. But if you want a white gun, you can turn up the Luma Max, and then, you know, everything in between. Render delay does pretty much as it says. You can use it to delay the render. I know some cameras actually have their video before their image, or no, video before their audio, so that's when you'd use it. But usually it's audio before video. Not very useful, if I'm being honest. Scaling / aspect ratio is just a different way of scaling a source. Like, okay, so you can do it here. Scale filtering. You could do all the same ones here. Like, I guess across different scenes, it can do something different, or I could just keep it, but usually you won't need it. Scroll. It makes a source scroll across itself. It's pretty weird. It's a pretty trippy effect. In fact, I'll show you it. Here we go. And as you can see, it's scrolling across itself, and loop will just make it so it keeps doing it, you know, across itself or not. And you can change a bunch of different things about it. Now, I don't really see a reason other than maybe like an overlay that's like able to scroll infinitely on itself. Yeah, it's just a little weird. Not much of a use. Sharpen, it's a sharpening filter. But not in the way you're thinking. It won't make pixels sharp. It'll do this. Yeah, not very good. Don't use it. Now, you did notice some of the filters just did the same thing something else did. The filters stay across the scenes in the collection. They won't exactly stay with this left click menu. So that's why you'd use it, you know, to keep the actual filter across everything in the collection, of course, only though, not across a bunch of different collections. You can use source copy though for that.